Okay, let's get started. So, to begin with, my name is Dania Chisholm. I am the A&R Program Assistant at the Clayton County Extension Office. And today we're going to be talking about fall vegetable gardening. Good day. So to begin with, what exactly is fall vegetable gardening? So the fast answer is growing vegetables in the fall. But it is a little bit more than that, right? So the longer answer is there are two types of vegetables that you can grow. So there's warm season crops and cold season crops. So with the warm season crops, it's not necessarily growing them in the fall, it's more of harvesting them in the fall. So they can't really survive cold or cooler weather. They will most definitely be killed by frost. And again, we're trying to harvest them in the fall. With the cool season crops, they can survive colder and cooler weather, and they may even survive freezes. You start growing these plants in the fall with the intention of harvesting them throughout the fall, the winter, and even the spring. So we mentioned freezes, so let's talk about frost dates. So here in this part of Georgia, our average first frost date is going to be November 7th. Again, that's an average, so things can happen. I can actually pull up some of the past frost dates. If you can see that, this is the UGA weather website. Last year we had a really late frost. It was December 1st, which means I was still cutting my grass all the way up until about then. But the year before that, it was November 12th. Even earlier in 2017, I can send this information out by email. So even earlier in 2017, we had an October 30th first frost date. So again, it's just an average, but it does help guide us to let us know when we should be planting things. So let's go over freezing temperatures. So light freezes, moderate freezes, and severe freezes. Light freezes, you may still have your tomatoes hanging on. They're gonna look a little damaged, but they may still hang on. But after that, things that are warm season crops are probably going to die. Things like kale, broccoli, collards, they will survive those freezes and even taste a little bit better because the cold weather cold weather causes the plant to draw all the sugars in. So they're sweeter, they're not as bitter, great tasting. Also, we're in zone 8A. So that helps us with our average minimum temperatures. The average minimum temperature for zone 8A is 10 to 15 degrees. It doesn't often get that low, but again, it's average. And each hardiness zone represents a 10-degree difference in minimum temps. So even, I'd say maybe 10 years ago, we might have been zone 7B, but with changing climates, we're zone 8A. I'm not complaining because that means that our growing season is just a little longer. Also, when it comes to frost dates, that helps us decide whether or not we want to start with seeds or transplants. So if you're starting with seeds, that'll normally be things that can survive the frost. They have a little bit longer. If you want to grow some of the warmer season crops for fall harvest and you want to grow them from seeds, you're going to have to start those earlier. If you just didn't get a jump on things, transplants are always a good way to go. There are some things though that don't transplant well. Some squashes don't really like their roots being played around with. Peas and beans are also the same. If you mess with the roots too much, you can kind of set the plant back a lot and you won't really get the harvest that you would have gotten if you had just direct sown. All right, so let's hop into the vegetables. We're gonna start with beets. Beets, the recommended planting dates is August 1st through September 20th. And again, when I mentioned recommended planting dates, just keep in mind that, not so much for the beets, but keep in mind that these planting dates take in the time it takes for that certain crop to mature. And if the crop is susceptible to freeze, then we want it to mature before that frost date comes. If we get an early freeze or some type of weird act of nature and it just takes the plant out, it's not really anything that you did. It's, you know, just things that we just can't account for. With cold weather crops like beets can handle the cold pretty well. You just want to make sure that they get enough growth on them before the cold comes, because the cold does also slow down plant growth. So when direct sowing beets, you want to sow the seeds about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch deep. Normally when we're direct sowing in the cold weather, we want to sow just a little, or for fall, when we're direct sowing in the fall, we want to sow a little bit deeper than what we would normally do in the spring, because it's still warm here. I know it was hit the 90s maybe last week. So we just want to give our seeds a chance to keep some moisture in. Beets, you really want to harvest them when they get to whatever size you like, but the recommended size for the best flavor and quality is about 2 inches in diameter. And the roots tend to toughen up in hot weather, so beets are really great for growing through the cold. Now, carrots. Carrots are considered a little bit more difficult to grow. You want to plant these between August 20th and September 15th. They do not like warm weather. They do not like hot weather. They need well-draining and rock-free soil. I know we've all seen some carrots on the internet that have like the legs. That's probably because the taproot hit a rock and then decided to keep growing. So if you don't care about that, then, you know, carrots are still edible. But if you want your pretty looking carrots, then you want to make sure that your soil doesn't have a lot of rocks in it. The seeds are really slow to germinate. Almost kind of like you're a little concerned that maybe they're not going to come up, but you just want to make sure that you keep the soil at a good moisture level, not too wet. Definitely don't let it dry. If it dries out at all after you plant the seeds, you're probably decreasing the amount of sprouts that you're going to have. When the seeds do germinate and they pop up, you want to thin those seedlings to about 1 or 2 inches apart, just to make sure you get a good sized carrot. And don't feel bad about wasting plants, because carrot sprouts are edible. Actually, most of the things that we're talking about today, when you're thinning them, you can eat what you thin. They don't compete with weeds well, so make sure that the area is free of weeds and you keep up with that. And mature carrots can be left in the ground until spring. It's kind of like having an in-ground refrigerator. They also will taste sweeter with the cold, so they're another one of those. Radishes. So radishes can actually be planted with your carrots because radishes are so fast to mature. They take about 25 to 30 days to harvest. Unless you're me and you planted radishes this spring and they took months to harvest, and then half of them bolted. But those are just learning experiences that probably won't happen to you. But radishes are great in the cool weather. They're not as hot as when you grow them, hot as in spicy, as when you grow them when it's hot outside. Also, radish greens taste really good. I know some people don't like them raw, but I do. And they also taste great cooked and sauteed, just mixed in. Now, turnips. Turnips can be planted August 10th through September 15th. And again, it's best to harvest them about 2 to 3 inches in diameter. You can also eat turnip greens. And these are a target for flea beetles. So row covers or insect nettings will help protect the greens. Okay, on to onions. So onions can be planted from September through December if you're growing for green onions or scallions. If you're growing for onion bulbs, you want to plant them through October 10th to November 10th. They can be started from plants, seeds, or sets. Now, this first picture here with the little green sprouts, that's what it looks like when an onion pops up from seed. When you sow the seeds, you can either direct sow them or you can sow them tightly in a container on the inside. And then when they get a little bigger, you can separate them out and then plant them where you want them. Next over, these small little onion bulbs are onion sets. So they're grown out, they're dug up, and then they're sold packaged to you. I've heard mixed reviews. So a majority of people have good success with them. Sometimes though, if the onion sets are just a little too big, the onion thinks that it's gone through a full year of life. Onions are biennials, so you run the risk of it bolting or flowering because it thinks it's in its second year, and that's when it goes to set seed. The bottom picture is onion starts or plants. That's onion starts or plants. So this is what you're trying to get to when you start your onions from seed and then you transplant them out. But that work has already been done for you. So you just go ahead and put those in your garden. So when you want to harvest onion bulbs, when half the tops have fallen over, and with onion greens, I know you've all seen people who regrow scallions or green onions by putting the bulb part in water or planting it in dirt. Those you can harvest as soon as there's enough to be harvested. And I'm sure there's a limit on how many times you can cut the greens and let it grow back. I haven't found it yet. So you don't actually have to pull those out of the dirt unless you just really, really want to use the bulb part. Also with onions, it's important to make sure that you're getting the correct variety for your area. So we're here in Georgia, of course. The best varieties are going to be short day onions. The type of onion is determined by the amount of daylight hours it needs to actually start bulbing. So short day onion bulbs need about 10 to 12 hours of daylight, which is about what we get here in the South. Long days need about 14 to 16. If you're feeling adventurous, you can try and find a long day onion that is early maturing. And if it doesn't work out, then the bulb just won't be big. And you gain some experience. Now there is something called an intermediate day onion, and those need about 12 to 13 hours. Those might be a little bit better to experiment with than the long day onions. All right, on to some greens. So with lettuce, you can plant that in September. The seeds won't germinate in temperatures over 80 degrees, so just keep that in mind. And you can direct sow, broadcast, or transplant. So direct sowing is when you space out the seeds and then you thin as needed. Broadcasting is kind of you just, like you're spreading grass seed, but it's lettuce. The top picture of the lettuce is what it would really look like, what it would most likely look like if you broadcasted. You really use broadcasting when you're doing the cut and come again. So that's when it's time to harvest the lettuce, most likely for leaf lettuce if you're broadcasting. You cut the tops off and you make sure to leave the growing point. You don't want to cut the growing point, but you cut the tops off and then the lettuce will grow back and you'll be able to come back and cut it again. The bottom picture is what lettuce looks like if you sow it and space it out or transplant it. I've had a good experience transplanting lettuce. It takes transplanting well for me, and it's I'm like a kind of an organized person when it comes to spacing things out. So it's easier for me to make sure that I know the exact amount of plants that are going to actually germinate, and I can space them out how I want to. But either way works, it just depends on what you want. All right, so spinach. Spinach, surprisingly, to me, is also one of those ones that are just a little bit harder. So with spinach, you want to plant it through September to October 15th. It it likes a neutral pH, so that would be a pH of 6.5 to 7.5. And to figure out the pH of your soil, you can do a soil test, which we offer here at the County Extension Office, or if you have the ability to do a soil test at home, you can also do that. If you realize that your soil has a acidic pH, then you might want to add some lime to it just to, raise it up a little bit. They do recommend that you do that about 3 months before planting, but if you somehow didn't make that because right now it's about to be September, then it's okay to add that in as you sow your plants or you transplant in. With spinach, you want to thin seedlings to about 4 to 6 inches apart. And you can use row covers to extend the harvest all the way to spring. I know spinach really handles the cold well, but again, it does slow down. So if you just, row covers will kind of keep in some of that heat and protect it from the cold, and it won't slow down. The growing won't slow down as much. Also with spinach, you can harvest it. Again, it's one of those things you choose how you want it. So you can do baby spinach, you can do regular leaf spinach. And also it's really easy to kind of do its own version of cut and come again. If you just pinch off the leaves, go through and pinch off the leaves, and then the plant will still be growing. All right, so now we're getting into some brassicas. So broccoli. With broccoli, you can plant that in August and early September. It's best if direct sown in the fall, just so it can, get situated where it is without having to be transplanted in. I like growing broccoli. It is again one of the more difficult ones, but it's a good challenge. And if the broccoli head doesn't come out how you expected it to, you can always remember that broccoli greens are pretty good. But if it does come out the way you want it, you're going to harvest that head when it's bright green in color and before any of the bloom starts open. And once you harvest that head, you don't have to dig out the broccoli plant, because chances are most likely you will get some smaller heads on the side that are actually a good enough size if, you're just snacking on broccoli or you want it as a side dish. Okay, so collards and kale. You want to plant these in August. They handle direct sowing or transplanting well. And again, with the flea beetles, row covers can really help with the protection from those. Kale, again, is one of those where you harvest it how you want it. So baby kale is really great. Or if you want those big kale or big collard leaves, you can also wait until then. With cabbage, you plant that in August through September as well. So when the nights are pretty cool and the days are warm, it can also be transplanted or direct seeded. And you want to make sure that you maintain adequate and consistent soil moisture. If the soil dries out a lot and then you get a heavy rain, or if it dries out a lot and then you remember that you haven't watered it, so you go out to water it, the head of the cabbage may split. It's kind of the same thing that happens to tomatoes when the moisture level in the soil isn't the same, or when there's a really heavy rain. But the splitting also doesn't ruin the quality of it ruins the look, but the vegetable is going to taste the same. So if your cabbage does split, you can still eat it. You want to harvest the cabbage head when it's fully formed. The leaves are tight before they start opening. If the cabbage head starts opening, then it's a little bit past the perfect harvest point, but it's up to you. I'm sure it would still taste pretty decent. Okay, now moving on to some warmer vegetables. Summer squash is about the last vegetable that's warm season that you can get in now. you have a few days to get in the ground. It's, I believe the last day is maybe Friday, based on our average first frost date. It's the time it takes for summer squash to mature is really fast. It's about 40 to 55 days. And, you know, I love summer squash. It's your last chance to grow your own. I suggest you try. And now some other warm season crops that I didn't talk about, mainly because their planting dates have passed, but beans, cucumbers, eggplant, okra. If your okra still is in the ground and you're harvesting that now, that's fine, but it's just a little too late to actually start growing okra from seed. The same thing with most of these also. If your plants are already in the ground, then you're good to go. But if you're looking at starting them, it's up to you if you want to take the chance. I know there are some shorter or more early maturing varieties of tomatoes that you may be able to find and get in the ground if you have transplants. That's really the only way I would recommend trying these out to see if you can beat the frost is with transplants at this point. And beans don't really take transplanting that well, so I would skip those for this year. All right, so we've gone over some plants that you can grow. Now, what happens if you kind of just want to take a break? You've grown a lot. You started in the spring. The summer was hard. The caterpillars got your tomatoes. The caterpillars were on your collards and your greens. You just want to take a break. So what I recommend, if you have garden beds, you don't want to leave them just soil. That's not really great for them. They need life living in them to keep the soil life happy and to keep the weeds from taking over. So you can mulch. There are lots of different types of mulch. You can use a wood mulch. Some people are using the cut up straw. If you have a lot of fall leaves available, if your trees are dropping leaves, they're gonna start soon, but if your trees are already dropping leaves, you can use those as mulch. Or you can use a green mulch or a living mulch, so like cover crops. So the common cover crops that we use here are for the earlier summery fall, be buckwheat, soy, clovers, and oats. Moving into the actual fall, red clover, rye, and hardy Austrian winter peas. And then moving towards the actual winter, it'll be winter wheat and rye. And for cover crops, again, what they do is they maintain soil life and they actually put nutrients back into your soil. So you grow them out, you're not really growing them to harvest anything. You're growing them to cut them and either lay them down as mulch or dig them into the soil so they add their nutrients back into the soil. So when you come in the spring and you're ready, you've had your relaxation time, you're ready to plant again, your soil will have benefited from the rest. Also, some of these are nitrogen fixers. So there's a bacteria that attaches to the roots or colonizes the roots basically, and it allows the plant to take in nitrogen from the atmosphere and put that in the roots. And because the plant, you're not growing to harvest, when you cut everything down, that nitrogen stays in the soil, and the nitrogen that's in the actual leaves and the stems also goes back to the soil. All right, so I see that we have some questions. So I'm gonna get to those. So when you say plant lettuce in September, is that for starting inside or broadcasting? I would say both. For both. If you start inside, you do have a little bit more leeway of how early you can start, but I'd say not really until September because it's still going to be a little bit hot in September. Will lettuce grow in containers? Yes, lettuce will grow in containers. Almost I think everything we talked about today, I have grown in containers successfully, even broccoli. Squash is a little hard though, because squash it looks like a smaller plant, but the tap root is really long on squash. So it doesn't really it didn't like when I was growing it in containers. But yes, lettuce can be grown in containers. Um, so row covers. Row covers are, it's like a fabric. So they have different types. They have ones that are specifically for insects. So that would be like a netting, kind of like the mosquito netting, but not really, that you see over beds sometimes. And some are just more of a more opaque fabric. Um, some row covers help keep the sun out, and some help keep the warmth in. So and for purchasing them, you can go to your big box stores, or you can search online. They should be pretty available. The price though, I'm not sure about the price. But you can purchase them online or in any of the big box stores. What is the minimum height of the planting bed? When you say height, do you mean like a raised bed, or can you elaborate more for me? Raised bed. Okay, so for a raised bed, the minimum height depends on what your raised bed is over. So if your raised bed is over soil, like you cleared out lands, you put your bed down, you filled it in with dirt, but the plant's roots can go down into the soil, then the height really isn't that important. If your raised bed is over a solid surface like concrete or a patio or something like that, then the depth depends on the plants that you're looking to grow. So like I mentioned with squash has a really long taproot, and it didn't like the pots that I was growing in. So you would definitely just want to do some research on the root depth, and just make sure that that you have that depth. So if you're trying to grow lettuce, you have a little bit more leeway if it's not that tall. If you're trying to grow, say, a carrot, you just want to make sure that the height is longer than the carrot that you're growing. Let's see. Would I start fall seeds in a greenhouse? You can. You can start your fall seeds inside and then kind of do your own transplants instead of buying them. I started okra yesterday in New Jersey. I think that maybe you want to look up your first frost date and then properly set expectations about whether you're going to get some okra from that plant. I'm not sure. Oh man. Again, it'll be a fun experience. And maybe you'll get to see at least some flowers. Okra flowers are really, really beautiful. Let's see. Okay, you have a grow light. When can you see the plants indoors before transplanting outside? So you're starting your plants inside, and you want to know how long you need to wait before you can transplant them outside. The general rule is about it depends. So for some plants, it's about 3 true leaves. So when your seeds germinate, they have their first set of leaves. It'll either be 1 leaf or 2 leaf, sometimes 3 if you have a special one. Onions are monocots, so they have 1 leaf. Most everything else that we talked about are dicots or dicotyledons, so they'll have 2 seed leaves or cotyledons. You want to wait until they have about 2 for kale, 2 to 3 true leaves. So not the seed leaves, but the actual leaves that kind of look like miniature versions of what the actual leaves of the plant look like. For summer squash, you want to transplant those before, like about when they have their second true leaf. You don't want to leave those in the pots too much or too long before you transplant them, because again, their roots don't like being played with. Let's see. Oh, someone mentioned that they get their row covers from Gardens Alive online. Any tips on treating white flies on collards, turnips, kale, and spinach? So that one's a tricky one that I haven't been able to fully get ahead of. I know I get some help just because I have my pollinator garden close to my garden beds. So I have some beneficial insects helping me out. You can try spraying them off with water. I know some people suggest neem oil, but sometimes that doesn't work. And aphids too. I see someone also mentioning how aphids can also be a pain. Sometimes it's just, the plant's calling out for those insects to come. And maybe they have a little bit too much nutrients. The plant's trying to get rid of something, or the plant is bolting, so it's in its last leg of life and the insects are coming. But I haven't really figured out the best way to handle those. But again, just try and stay on top of it. So if you feel like brushing them off with your hands or in a glove, that should work for the meantime. Or for aphids, you can go around squishing them. But also look out for things like ladybugs and lacewing larvae, because they're really helpful, and you don't want to accidentally spray them off or hit them with whatever you're spraying to kill the whiteflies or the aphids. And someone did mention that basil helps deter whitefly. I'll have to look more into that. All right, so I was using my container pots for tomatoes. Can I grow any of these plants mentioned today in the same container? So tomatoes are heavy feeders. So what you want to do is just make sure that you add some nutrients back in that pot. I don't see that there should be a problem with following tomatoes up with anything that we mentioned, but you do just want to keep in mind that tomatoes probably depleted all the nutrients that you put in that pot. Okay, do I have any advice on the best method to start seed side? We've seen people do it all kinds of ways, from cardboard, egg cartons, 6 cell trays. Really, it's whatever works for you. I've done toilet paper rolls, the actual plastic trays, like the really tiny cells, and then potted them into bigger containers and then put them in the ground. It's up to whatever works for you. If it works, that's the thing that matters. And really, gardening can be a very expensive thing to do if you let it. So if you can do it with the least costs and the amount of effort that you're comfortable with, then that's what's good. Okay, what is the best plant test to use to predict turnip, collards, and cabbage leaves? So that depends on what you're trying to protect them from. I know in the summer my kale got hit with the caterpillars, and if I had just sprayed them with some BT, which is a bacteria, then that would have cut down on that. But instead, I just kind of sacrificed them and didn't worry about it. It depends on what's on your plants. And someone asked, is companion planting probably the best help? Companion planting can be helped. If you like, I can actually send out some resources on companion planting and pest management through your emails from the Eventbrite after this is over. But companion planting can be helpful. Just keep in mind that sometimes things become like enough people say it, so it becomes true, but it doesn't really work that great. Kind of one of the things are marigolds and tomatoes. So a lot of us have heard that marigolds keep the nematodes away from the tomatoes, the root knot nematodes. Now, the way that works best, though, is if the only thing growing is the marigolds. So the nematodes have no choice but to go to the marigolds, and then they don't survive after feeding on those roots. But if you have multiple plants in the same place, they're just going to go to what they can survive on feeding on. So it's kind of one of those things where companion planting does work, but you just have to make sure it's one of the things that does work and not one of the things that just a lot of people say works. How do you prepare your garden for fall gardening? So, good question. I just took out my tomatoes yesterday. I know that's very early for a lot of people, but I was kind of tired of them at this point. So you want to clean up with squash. If you had anything that had any diseases, you don't want to leave any of that on the ground. You want to clean that up. It's good to leave the roots in the ground though, because those roots breaking down do help nourish the soil. But the top, you want to make sure all that's gone. And then it takes some planning. So if there's things that you know can still last a little bit longer, you just got to decide where you can put things. It's generally recommended. So if you grew kale, if you started kale, collards, broccoli, anything that's a brassica in the spring and it's still there, you don't want to go back in the same place again. Just because of a pest, from a pest-wise standpoint. But really, you want to make sure that their nutrients are good. You can take a look at the quality of the soil. If it's a pot, you know the plant that was in there was taking up a lot of nutrients. You need to add some back. If you have access to compost, you can put some compost and either mix it in or just, spread a layer and mulch with compost. It's just kind of making sure everything looks okay. Let's see. I have bluebells bulbs in the bottom of my tomato pots. When the tomato finishes, the bluebells pop up not long after and they die back before the tomato is ready to start again. Okay. I never considered that. All right. Okay. Great. You guys are doing a great job answering questions in the chat. We still have time for more questions. I am going to post a program evaluation link. If you could all take that survey for me, that would be great. And just let us know. In it, we'll ask like how you heard about the program, anything that you would have liked to have learned, and then any suggestions for future programming. That would be really helpful just as we move into the next year. And also just as a plug, this week we also have a seed saving program, which I'm really excited for. I'm also doing that one. We're trying to maybe get some more programming on seed saving next year. And then maybe thinking about having a seed swap or some type of event just to kind of celebrate all the knowledge and put the knowledge to good use. And also, I'm just gonna pop in the chat a vegetable planting chart from UGA. And I can also send that by email. And then information on the best time to harvest vegetables. Okay. Any more questions? And feel free to, take yourself off mute and ask your question if you want.
Yes, I do have a question. For those cover crop, so let's say I want to plant the fava bean.
Mm-hmm.
I want to eat the beans as well as, after after I harvest the beans, then what do I do with the plant? Do I pull out the whole plant, or I just chop the plants into smaller pieces and then put it underneath the soil, or how does it work? In terms of the nitrogen.
So fava beans are a great cover crop. Now, because you're looking to harvest them, the benefit is going to be a lot less than if you chopped them before they were able to flower and set fruit or set bean. But it'll still have some benefit to your soil. So after you harvest, if you just, you can chop up the plant into smaller pieces if you want and dig it in, or you can just leave it on the top if you're okay with that as mulch. And just when it's time to plant things for the next season, you just plant it, slide the mulch apart or slide the plant matter apart and plant it in the dirt. The leaves will disappear pretty quickly. It's the stems that could take a little longer, but those will also, the soil life will take care of that, and also the elements will take care of that. So you can just leave them on top, or you can dig them in.
So if I don't harvest the beans, the fava beans, then I just leave it, the whole plant. Is that how you use it for the cover crop? Is that what it is?
The cover crops, normally they suggest you time it before the plants flower, because the flowering draws up all the nitrogen and uses up the plant's store of nitrogen. But honestly, I'd say if you want to grow fava beans to eat, don't worry about that. The plant matter that's left after you harvest will have some benefit to your soil, and it'll be better than not having anything. So if you want to eat them, then you can go ahead, and I suggest you do.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions?
How do you get your carrots to germinate?
Okay, so it's you have to stay on it. So you have to check it, make sure it's still moist, so water it, but then also don't water it too hard. So like if you're watering with a hose attachment, you don't want to spray the soil too hard. It'll pop the carrot seeds out of place. And then that'll be the reason why they didn't germinate, because the seeds aren't where you put them. But some people use burlap sacks to keep the soil moist. And then you just have to remember to, check it, to remove it, so it's not there when the seeds do germinate. I've heard of someone using a wooden board, but again, you need to know the timing for when the carrots are going to pop up, because if you leave that board there and the carrots have sprouted, then the seedlings will most likely die if you don't catch it soon enough. But it's all about the moisture level and keeping it constant for carrot seeds, and patience.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any more questions? All right, well, you're welcome. I'm glad you guys came and we were able to share this Zoom space. I hope to see you again at some of our other programs for the rest of this year. Any last minute questions, you can feel free to pop them in the chat. I'm kind of don't want to end the meeting since you all are still in here. Oh, you're from Melbourne? Wow, that is cool. Technology. Well, all right. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your evening. I am going to go. And again, thank you for coming.